Nicotine is the product. Cigarettes are just a delivery system. A tobacco company wrote that, about its own product, in an internal memo, not an advertisement, a memo, meant for no one outside the company to ever see. Why would a company put that in writing? If you've ever smoked, vaped, or tried to quit and it didn't stick, what you're about to see was built in a specific, tested, patented way, with exactly that outcome in mind. Most of us think a cigarette is just tobacco rolled in paper. Burn a plant, breathe the smoke, that's the whole story. The documents tell a longer story. A chemical process that changes how fast nicotine hits your blood. A filter built to fool a testing machine. And an additive list designed to make starting easier and stopping harder. The World Health Organization says smoking kills more than 8 million people a year, worldwide. The CDC puts the cost to the United States alone at over $600 billion a year in healthcare and lost productivity combined. That is not what happens when a plant just happens to be addictive. That is what happens when addiction becomes a design target and engineers hit it again and again for decades. Over the next 25 minutes, we go exhibit by exhibit, from freebase chemistry labs in the 1960s to 14 million pages of internal memos that became public in the 1990s, to the vape pod sitting in someone's pocket right now. Because the engineering did not stop when cigarettes got their warning labels, it just changed shape. That is a real patent number. It belongs to a cigarette company. And it is not a patent for a better tasting tobacco. It is a patent for controlling exactly how much nicotine reaches your bloodstream per puff before you ever light the cigarette. We are going to open the file on that, exhibit by exhibit. Start with a plant that has been part of human life for thousands of years, and a laboratory, decades later, asking one specific question about it. Not how do we grow more tobacco? The question was, how do we get more nicotine into a person's blood faster from the exact same puff? That question has an answer. It is called freebasing, and it has a very exact chemistry. The same basic idea, chemically, behind the difference between powder cocaine and crack. We're not saying cigarettes are cocaine. We are saying the industry used the same chemical logic on purpose and wrote it down. Before we open that file, one honest note. This video is education, built from court documents, patents, and published research, not medical advice. So if any part of this touches your own situation, bring it to your doctor. Now, Exhibit 1. Tobacco leaves naturally carry nicotine, but most of it starts out bound, chemically locked to other molecules in the leaf, in what's called a salt form. Bound nicotine is absorbed slowly, and it feels harsh going down, which is part of why the first cigarette anyone ever smokes tends to taste terrible. In the 1960s, tobacco company researchers began studying how to change that. The internal name for one such Philip Morris research effort into ammonia-based tobacco treatment became known, in litigation, as part of what document reviewers labeled the ammonia technology, or informally, in some of the later press coverage, Project Cameo. The goal was specific: raise the pH of the tobacco, unlock the nicotine from its bound salt form, and convert some of it into free nicotine, the form your body absorbs faster and more completely. Chemists call this freebasing, and the tool that does it is ammonia. Add ammonia compounds to tobacco or to the reconstituted sheet, and the pH of the smoke rises. A higher pH shifts nicotine out of its bound salt form and into its free or freebase form. Freebase nicotine vaporizes more easily when tobacco burns and crosses into the bloodstream through the lungs faster. Researchers Anna White and Peter Barrow, reviewing internal industry documents in a paper published in the American Journal of Public Health, described this pH manipulation strategy as one of the tobacco industry's most consistent and best documented design goals across decades of internal research. It is genuinely comparable, mechanically, to how cocaine users learn that freebasing cocaine into crack hits the bloodstream faster than snorting a bound powder form. A faster hit does two things at once. It makes the drug feel stronger for the same dose, and a stronger hit trains the brain's reward circuitry harder, which is exactly why speed of delivery, not just total amount, drives how addictive a substance becomes. That single design lever, pH, sits underneath almost everything else in this story. Reconstituted tobacco sheet, menthol and other additives, even how a filter is ventilated. Nearly every other engineering choice we're about to walk through either raises that pH further, hides the harshness that comes with it, or controls exactly how much nicotine that higher pH delivers per puff. And this wasn't a rumor picked up by journalists. It came from the company's own paper, which is where the next exhibit comes in. The memo where a Brown and Williamson researcher stopped describing nicotine as a flavor component and started describing it in writing as the entire point of the product. That memo has a name, a date, and a case number. Exhibit 2. In 1994, congressional hearings and a lawsuit filed by the state of Minnesota against the major tobacco companies forced something that had never happened before. The companies had to hand over their own internal files. Not press releases, not marketing copy, research memos, meeting notes, and correspondence, some going back to the 1950s, that were never written for the public. The state of Minnesota's case alone produced roughly 35 million pages of internal documents. After the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement resolved most of the remaining state lawsuits, millions of those pages were placed into a permanent public archive, now hosted by the University of California, San Francisco, and known as the Truth Tobacco Industry Documents Archive. Inside that archive sits a memo tobacco control researchers have cited for decades. A Brown and Williamson researcher, writing internally, described the company's product this way. Think of the cigarette pack as a storage container for a day's supply of nicotine. Think of a cigarette as a dispenser for a dose unit of nicotine. A dose unit. Not a flavor, not a habit, a dose. That same document, along with related B&W research files reviewed in later litigation, is why the phrase, "nicotine is the product, cigarettes are just the delivery system," became one of the most quoted lines to come out of the whole document release. This is contested territory in one specific way, worth being precise about. The documents are real, filed, and public. What is interpretation is exactly which internal author wrote which line and in what precise context, since different plaintiffs' filings and different researchers have cited slightly different memos making the same underlying point. The pattern, though, across dozens of separate documents is not contested. The pattern is this. Internally, nicotine delivery was the acknowledged engineering target. Externally, for decades, the industry's public position was that nicotine wasn't addictive at all. In April 1994, the chief executives of the 7 largest U.S. tobacco companies testified before Congress that they did not believe nicotine was addictive. Internal memos, already in the company's own files at that point, said otherwise. That gap between the internal file and the public statement is the actual center of this story. And it shows up again in the next exhibit, the physical engineering of the tobacco itself. By the 1970s, cigarette filler was no longer simply dried, shredded tobacco leaf. Companies had developed reconstituted tobacco sheet made by taking tobacco scraps, stems, and dust left over from processing, pulping them, and reforming them into a uniform sheet, similar in principle to how paper is made. That sheet could be engineered directly. Chemists could add ammonia compounds during manufacturing to raise its pH, control its nicotine content independent of the leaf it came from, and blend it into cigarettes at a controlled ratio. It let companies decide, sheet by sheet, roughly how much nicotine a given batch would deliver, regardless of natural variation in the tobacco crop that year. Alongside reconstituted sheet, companies also patented ways to physically puff and expand tobacco. Treating shredded tobacco with a gas like carbon dioxide or freon under pressure, then rapidly releasing that pressure, makes the tobacco expand, the way puffed rice expands from a compact grain. Expanded tobacco takes up more space per gram, which sounds like a manufacturing detail. It isn't only that. It let a company fill the same size cigarette with less actual tobacco leaf, cutting raw material cost, while independently tuning the nicotine content of the reconstituted sheet mixed in alongside it. 2 separate levers working together: how much space the filler takes up, and how much nicotine each puff of it delivers. Tobacco control researchers, writing in the journal Tobacco Control, have documented this as part of a broader pattern the field calls precision nicotine dosing engineering. Not a side effect of manufacturing efficiency, but a deliberate, tested capability the industry built and refined for decades. That capability meant a company could keep a cigarette's advertised nicotine yield stable year over year. regardless of what that year's actual tobacco crop happened to contain. Which raises an obvious question. If a company can dial nicotine yield up or down like this, precisely, on purpose, what happens when regulators start asking companies to report lower numbers? That question has an answer too. It's called the lights cigarette, and the story behind it is the strangest one yet, because the number on the pack and the number in your lungs were never the same thing. Starting in the 1960s, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission required cigarette companies to test tar and nicotine yield using a standardized smoking machine. That machine took a fixed number of puffs, of a fixed size, at a fixed interval, then measured what came through the filter. Companies quickly discovered they could add rows of tiny, nearly invisible ventilation holes around the filter, positioned exactly where the machine's mechanical mouthpiece sealed against the cigarette. Those holes let outside air dilute the smoke the machine measured, which lowered the machine's tar and nicotine reading, letting the pack legally say light or low tar. The problem? A person is not a machine. A person's fingers and lips can cover those ventilation holes. The National Cancer Institute's Monograph 13, a formal government review of decades of research, concluded that smokers of light cigarettes unconsciously compensate, covering the holes, taking deeper puffs, or smoking more cigarettes to get the nicotine dose their body was already used to. The machine measured less, the person, adjusting without even realizing it, still inhaled roughly the same amount. That same monograph concluded there was no convincing evidence that switching to lower, machine-measured yield cigarettes lowered a smoker's actual health risk, because real-world smoking behavior did not match the machine's fixed puffing pattern. This wasn't a testing flaw the companies stumbled into. Filter ventilation was engineered. Internal filter research documents, now public through the same litigation archive, describe testing exactly how many ventilation holes, at what diameter and placement, would satisfy the FTC machine's specific mouthpiece geometry. In 2010, the US moved to ban the terms light, low, and mild on cigarette packaging altogether. Not because the chemistry changed, because regulators finally accepted that the label had never described what actually happened inside a real smoker's lungs. A rigged test is one kind of engineering, but the industry didn't stop at the filter. It also engineered what was mixed directly into the tobacco you'd actually taste. That's the additive file, and it's the one that reaches furthest into who starts smoking in the first place. In 1994, under pressure from Congress, tobacco companies were required for the first time to disclose the additives used in their cigarettes. The combined list ran to roughly 599 named ingredients submitted by the major manufacturers to the Department of Health and Human Services. It included things you'd expect, like flavoring agents, but also cocoa, licorice extract, various sugars, and menthol, none of which are tobacco. None of those ingredients are there by accident, and internal research explains why each one earned its place. Cocoa and licorice both help mask the naturally harsh, acrid taste of tobacco smoke, and cocoa in particular has bronchodilator properties, meaning it can help open the airways slightly, making it physically easier to inhale smoke more deeply. Sugars added to the tobacco blend increase what researchers call smoke volume and perceived smoothness. A smoother, less harsh first cigarette is, quite specifically, a first cigarette someone is more likely to finish and more likely to try again. Menthol does something else entirely. It triggers cold-sensing receptors in the throat. That cooling sensation has a mild, numbing, anesthetic-like effect, which masks the throat irritation smoke normally causes. Research published in Tobacco Control has linked this directly to easier smoking initiation, especially among first-time and younger smokers. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration eventually acted on exactly that research. In 2009, the FDA banned flavored cigarettes in the U.S., including candy and fruit flavors, specifically because of their appeal to underage smokers, though menthol itself was left temporarily exempt, a gap regulators are still working to close. Look at the additive list as a whole, and a pattern emerges that internal researchers understood clearly. Mask the harshness, ease the first try, increase how much smoke a person comfortably inhales. Every one of those outcomes points the same direction, toward more nicotine absorbed more easily by more people more often. For years, this stayed inside internal files. Then a small stack of boxes changed that. In 1994, a former Brown & Williamson paralegal named Merrill Williams anonymously mailed roughly 4,000 pages of internal company documents to a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. That same year, Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, a former Brown & Williamson Vice President of Research and Development, became a confidential source for a government lawsuit and later gave sworn testimony describing the company's internal knowledge of nicotine's addictiveness and its work on nicotine delivery. Testimony later dramatized in the film The Insider. Those leaks, alongside state lawsuits, forced discovery on a scale the industry had never faced. The state of Minnesota's lawsuit against the major tobacco companies, which went to trial in 1998, is widely credited by legal historians as producing the single largest release of internal tobacco industry documents up to that point, roughly 35 million pages. Later that same year, 46 states reached a combined settlement with the major manufacturers. The 1998 Master Settlement Agreement required the companies to pay states more than $200 billion over its first 25 years to cover smoking-related healthcare costs, to shut down youth marketing groups like the Tobacco Institute, and critically for this video, to permanently make millions of pages of their internal documents public. That last requirement is the reason this video is even possible. Every memo, every patent filing, every research file we've walked through tonight exists in a public archive because a legal settlement forced the industry to open its own drawers. It's worth being precise about what the settlement did and didn't do. It didn't ban cigarettes, and it didn't stop the engineering. Ammonia treatment, reconstituted sheet, filter design, and additives are all still legal, still in use, and still regulated only in narrow, specific ways. The document trail closed one era. It didn't close the underlying design logic. And that logic found a new product to live in. In 2015, a small company called Juul Labs launched a vape built around a specific chemistry choice, nicotine salt, rather than the freebase nicotine most earlier e-cigarettes used. That naming is a little confusing because nicotine salt is chemically closer to the bound, naturally occurring form in raw tobacco leaf, but formulated specifically to be smoother and less throat irritating to inhale at high concentration, which let manufacturers pack in far more nicotine per puff than most vapors realized. Research published in Tobacco Control found nicotine salt pod devices deliver blood nicotine levels comparable to an actual cigarette, something most earlier vape devices built on freebase e-liquid could not do nearly as efficiently, because raw freebase nicotine at high concentration is simply too harsh to inhale comfortably in large amounts. Solve the harshness problem and you can raise the dose. That sentence should sound familiar by now. It's the same design lever the cigarette industry pulled with reconstituted tobacco and menthol decades earlier, just executed with modern flavor chemistry and a lithium battery instead of a rolling paper. Device wattage and coil temperature add a second modern lever the cigarette era never had. Higher wattage vaporizes e-liquid faster and can increase nicotine yield per puff, meaning some devices let a user, deliberately or not, self-adjust their own dose in a way no fixed cigarette filter ever allowed. Flavor chemistry closes the loop, the same way cocoa and licorice once did. Fruit, dessert, and menthol-style flavors mask the harshness of high-concentration nicotine salt, which is precisely why the FDA has repeatedly cited flavor variety as central to youth vaping appeal in its own regulatory actions. Mask the harshness, raise the dose, make the first try easy. It's the exact same three-step design pattern. Different chemistry, different decade, different regulatory system still trying to catch up. But it is, functionally, the same engineering brief the tobacco industry wrote for itself 60 years ago. Which brings us to the point of all these exhibits. Not to make you afraid, to make you accurate. Here's the full file, laid end to end. Ammonia chemistry raised the pH of tobacco to freebase more nicotine. Reconstituted and expanded tobacco let companies dial nicotine yield with precision. Filter ventilation holes fooled a testing machine that never measured a real human being. Additives masked harshness and eased that first difficult cigarette. And when lawsuits and whistleblowers forced the file open, the documents confirmed what smokers had felt for a century. This was never just a plant. If you smoke or vape right now, none of this is a verdict on you. You were, quite literally, on the receiving end of a decades-long, well-funded engineering effort aimed at exactly your brain's reward system. That is not a willpower story. That is a design story. And design stories have an upside most people don't expect. Nicotine dependence, once you understand it as an engineered chemical process rather than a personal failing, becomes a lot more like other things doctors help people manage every day. And quit rates are genuinely higher now than they've ever been. The CDC reports over 60% of US adults who have ever smoked have successfully quit. That number existed even while every technique in this video was actively being used against them. Understanding the engineering doesn't make quitting effortless, but it does make it make sense, which is its own kind of relief. The next time you see a new vape flavor, a smooth pod, or a lighter anything, ask the question these documents finally forced into the open. Smooth for whose benefit, and lighter measured by what machine? That question, more than any single fact in this video, is the one worth keeping. Addiction here was never an accident of chemistry left to chance. It was a specific, iterative, tested engineering outcome, filed, patented, and eventually put into the public record. The file is open now. That part, at least, nobody can take back.